Welcome to the Global Investor Podcast, a show that focuses on helping foreign investors enter the lucrative U.S. real estate market. Host Charles Carillo combines decades of real estate investing experience with a professional background in international banking to interview experts in all areas of U.S. real estate investing. Now, here's your host, Charles Carillo.
Welcome to another episode of the Global Investors Podcast. I'm your host, Charles Carillo. Today we have Jorge Contreras. Jorge is a real estate investor with a focus on Airbnb investing and mentoring. He earns passive income by strategically choosing and managing Airbnbs. So thanks so much for being on the show, Jorge.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on, Charles. It's quite an honor to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome to have someone on with different special skills that they work with, and yours being Airbnb is not something that we typically speak about on the show. So can you give us a little background on yourself prior to starting your current business and real estate career?
Prior to real estate and Airbnb?
Sure, yes.
Yeah, great question. So my first business was, I was 20 years old, 12 years ago in 2012. I became a professional dance instructor. So I used to teach bachata, which is a sensual partner dance from the Dominican Republic. And I got to travel to over 25 countries. I was able to create with my partner the very first bachata Latin dance festival in Los Angeles, the first nightclub, the first team. So we definitely pioneered and got a lot of experience when it comes to like personal branding, marketing, sales, and building team systems, operations. I had 8 streams of income, and then was able to start utilizing that income to invest it into real estate back in 2012. So that's what I did. I created a really successful and big personal brand in the Latin dance space. And I no longer do anything with Latin dance. Everything I do now, it has to do with real estate investing and teaching others how to create financial freedom.
So why did you choose real estate as your investment vehicle?
Yeah, great question. So as I was traveling, when I was a teenager, one of my goals and my visions in life was to be able to travel to see the world. And as my relationship started to get more serious with my wife, girlfriend at the time, in 2013, 14, 15, I didn't want to continue that lifestyle where I was always away from her, and where in the future we were planning on having kids, which now we have a 10-month young daughter. And I didn't want to, repeat that cycle where like I grew up without a father, and I didn't want to be that dad that was traveling 80% of the time and was never home. And so I wanted to do something where I could create passive income and make money in my sleep, and where it would give me not just time and financial freedom, but also location freedom. And the way I've structured my Airbnb and real estate business, it's been exactly that. We run it exactly like an online business. So I live in Los Angeles now, but I could live anywhere in the world and the income would be the same.
Now, you started in real estate with Airbnb investing?
I started with long-term rentals in 2012 and got into the short-term rental space in 2017.
Awesome. Okay. So can you explain a little bit about the Airbnb investment model that you use and that you teach to your students?
Yeah, so there's 3 ways that you can acquire, launch, and automate Airbnbs, and that's where you buy properties. You could also sublease, which is if I was to rent one of your properties, Charles, say at $1,200 a month, maybe that's for market rent. And if I am able to successfully generate, say, $2,400, then I'd be in the arbitrage model. So the difference would be mine. And then finally, the third option is where you can manage other people's Airbnbs. So imagine you have an apartment unit of 10 units and 3 of those are on Airbnb, and you're like, hey, Jorge, I know this is a great option, but I have so much going on. Can you manage it for me? I would charge you a percentage of the gross revenue and provide a hands-off experience to you. So that's what we call co-hosting. So I have some on all 3, on the buy side, on the sublease side, and also on the co-hosting side. And my students are all doing all 3 strategies, or one or 2 of the strategies as well.
Awesome. So how do you locate an area or neighborhood that you're going to target, and then a specific property to list with Airbnb?
Yeah, awesome question. There is a software called Mash Advisor where we are able to look at what Airbnbs are already generating in any area. So I can go in there and put, Long Beach, California, or Fort Lauderdale, Miami, Orlando, and it'll tell me, hey, these properties here are generating, this much and this much. So if I see that there's properties that say host between 8 to 12 people, and maybe they're 3 2s, and within 10 minutes from the beach or 10 minutes from Disneyland, and I can see, I see that they're making between 4,000 to 6,000 a month. I'm able to see how much they've done in the last 12 months. And then say the average is 4 to 6 grand, but I can see that you can rent these properties for like 1,800. Then I know there's a pretty good spread. And that's how we're able to then find similar properties that are not yet on Airbnb, and we can launch them.
Okay, so you're researching the areas, you're figuring out which ones perform the best, and then you can target those areas. So what types of returns do you usually see from Airbnb when they're properly managed? Maybe what would be improperly, and then what would be a proper return you would see?
Yeah, it depends on the strategy, but one of the most popular strategies is subleasing. And usually in a sublease, you got to pay the first month a deposit and then some furniture and decor. Hopefully you don't have to completely furnish the property. If you did, and you were to spend say 10 grand to 12 grand in like furniture and things like that, you might be looking at, like, depending on the area, 3 to 7 months to make all your money back and be at a break-even point, right? And then after that, you'd be like in profit. If you go with the co-hosting route, what I really like about it is that you're in profit, pretty much infinite return on investment. You don't have to put any money out of pocket because you're offering a management service. So you start cash flowing on day one.
So you're just in the co-host model, which is something new. I've seen it before in Airbnb, but I never knew what it really meant. With the co-host model, you're really just fine tuning another host's property, let's say, that they've subleased, that they own, whatever it might be. Now, explain that as that co-host. I imagine if you're coming as a co-host, you're a super host or something like this. So explain what's the vacancy, or usually are you guys, how does that usually work, your vacancy per month, and how the super host helps you being a co-host, and what a super host is?
Yeah, great question, Charles. So for my portfolio, me and my partner, we have about 16 Airbnbs right now. Combined on the own, sublease, and co-host. Most of them are on the sublease side. And we have about an 80% occupancy. Obviously, it's dropped right now due to the corona situation. People are quarantined and whatnot. But this too will pass, right? We've been through 32 recessions before, so it's just a matter of time. So, and then as far as superhosts, you have to have 4.8 or higher, with at least 10 reservations, and keeping a 98% communication score. And when you do, like when I stay at Airbnbs, I only look at superhost properties. I don't even, because why do I want to look at the properties that are 4.0 or 4.3, right? So I'm only looking at properties that average 4.8 or higher, because I know that they're great properties, and otherwise they wouldn't be super host. So whenever you're a super host, you can demand higher prices, and of course have more occupancy for, just having a better overall property and system going on.
When you're doing the co-host, you're bringing the super host, you're bringing the ability to get them to that 80% occupied level. Where are you? What do you usually charge? How do you charge for this as the co-host model?
Yeah, for the 3 on the co-host that we have right now, it's at 22% of the gross revenue. So the cleaning fee gets first passed on to us, because when you look at Airbnb revenue, they put the cleaning and the total revenue in one basket. So we break it down and we're like, okay, well, how much of that revenue is cleaning? That cleaning fee gets passed on to us, which is a pass-through expense, because then it goes to our cleaning staff. And we keep about 10% of that fee, the cleaning fee, which is slightly marked up, for replenishables like toilet paper, paper towels, body wash, shampoo, and whatnot. And then of the remaining revenue, excluding the cleaning fee, we take 22% of that.
Okay. And then
30% is pretty normal.
Oh, okay. All right, I gotcha. And then obviously, when you see the listing, Airbnb clearly marks their fee in there that they're charging as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's slightly below 3%.
Okay. All right. So you touched on it earlier, and it's a question that I've been waiting to ask you. about how you and your students are reacting to COVID-19, and is that knocked out everything, or is it just? I mean, how's Airbnb talk to their hosts?
Yeah. You said, how's Airbnb what?
Like how's Airbnb? I heard Airbnb refunded like a ton of like everybody, right? And then how are they working with you guys, saying that when can you start again? I mean,
Yeah. So essentially what Airbnb as a company has done is they created like a really like a one-sided structure where the guest can get an entire refund for any bookings from like March 14th or March 14th to April 14th, 100%. Looks like anywhere in the world, no matter what, due to the situation. However, there's a lot of owners or people subleasing or co-hosting, mainly on the owning and subleasing side, right? People still have to pay their rents and their mortgages. And so obviously that creates an issue because, it's like, how long can you sustain yourself? And so what they should have done is some type of 50-50 structure where it's like, hey, your reservation was, $800, you're going to get 50 back and 50 goes to the host so they can offset their expenses. That would have been like a win-win situation, but that's not what they've done. So a lot of hosts, are like furious right now, especially the host who they treat this like a job and literally this is their paycheck. That's unfortunate. And what we've done to, do what we can, do what you can with what you have, where you're at. So what we've done is we've structured, myself and all my students, we've edited like the listing titles, and we've used words like sanitized, private, quarantine home, things like that. And it's helped a lot. I mean, one of my students, I'm actually going to bring him on tonight's coaching call to share with all the newer students how he's done it. And he actually brought up the idea. And so he's booked from now and all of April, like his mortgage will be completely paid 100%. And that's awesome. And that's definitely not most cases. For my properties, that me and my partners, we're probably like at a 40% occupancy right now. So it's going to cover a lot of the payments, but we've been restructuring and creating agreements where the landlords are going to pay the rest, at least for the month of April, to create a win-win, because it also wouldn't be in their best interest to try to market a property at fair market rent right now during, this situation. So we're just creating short-term solutions to be able to move forward. But, a lot of people are saying this should last another 2 to 6 weeks and then things will get back to normal. And I think that as soon as things get better, Charles, people who postpone their vacations, there's going to be like an influx of tourism and travel, and that's when Airbnb hosts are going to make up some of what they missed out on.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's just right now in a pause, and that's for everybody that's involved with hospitality or travel. So what are some of the best ways to protect against downside risk with Airbnbs? Let's say in a normal environment. Obviously this is a black swan type episode, but say for example, like cities changing regulations, stuff like that. How does someone protect against that if they're going in? I mean, owning it, obviously co-host, you don't really have too much of a risk on that, I would imagine. But if you're subleasing, obviously, or if you're, obviously signing on debt, you have a mortgage.
Yeah, one of the number one thing is not going into an area where Airbnbs are not allowed, right? And when you call the building department or whoever's in charge in your city, the three options or three answers they're going to give you is: one, we do allow Airbnbs, you just need to get a license and then you're good. And number two, they could say we don't have an ordinance yet. And number three, they could say we don't allow Airbnbs. And I would say it's almost like when I invest, I look at like, okay, this is like for sure, it's almost guaranteed, but it's very conservative, not very risky. And then I have like my middle bucket that this is somewhat conservative, but a little bit. And this is like really risky, right? Except on the Airbnb side, I would not go on that third bucket, and I would focus more on the middle two, with primarily only launching Airbnbs in areas where there is an ordinance and where they are allowed. And there's a ton of them. And so that would be the first thing, because you want to build a sustainable and scalable business. But if if you're going to be subject to ordinances, that makes it really risky.
So when you're doing a lease, a sublease, because obviously this is not going to be a normal lease, typical lease that you're going to get from a landlord, because in every landlord lease I've seen for a 12-month lease, it has something in there about not allowing subleasing. So explain the agreement and explain if you have some sort of backdoor in there, if there's a government regulation that changes.
Yeah, great question. So we are very transparent with the landlords from the very beginning. We let them know that we are, a short-term rental, vacation, and corporate housing company. And there's a lot of things that we do to make sure that we run a smooth operation. So we have like noise sensors inside the property, external cameras, a quiet policy from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m., maximum 2 to 3 cars to be able to park. A strict no party, no event policy. We collect a deposit from each guest. Usually when people try to throw a party, it's always locals. So you're not going to have somebody from Australia come to Los Angeles to throw a party, right? It's usually local. So if it's a local, you're like, why are they trying to book in LA if you're from LA? Then you can start digging and finding out and like letting them know, just reminding them. And so we do a lot of things like that we talk about in the initial conversation to help create, peace of mind. And that definitely helps. And as far as the back door, I mean, the only back door is that if there was to change an ordinance, like say they allowed Airbnb and all of a sudden they changed it, then the best case scenario at that point is to put a long-term tenant for the remainder of the lease. Break even, collect your deposit, and then move on to the next one. Obviously, right now, like we said, this is the black swan. So we've been talking to the landlords and just creating short-term solutions for the time being.
Yeah, that's a great way of doing it. Or also just going to the landlord and saying, hey, if I rent this out to a good tenant, we part ways and you're transferring the lease to this party. That's awesome. That's a great way of doing it. I wasn't thinking that. So I hear you speaking a lot of you're talking about the party thing, which is kind of cool because I was on your Facebook group and you're talking about some sort of piece of technology, I guess an app that can tell you how many people are at your property. Is that what is that? What is that? It's very interesting. I never even knew that existed.
Don't know about it, but I have a student that is super he goes into all the detail, all the analytics, like he thinks like an engineer. And he's just a really smart guy. And he actually is the one that told the rest of our students about it. And I honestly don't even know enough about it to share, but I just know that with this app, you're able to detect like how many cell phones are connected to the Wi-Fi or something along those lines. And they will tell you how many people are there, which is pretty awesome. Yeah. But yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. That's interesting. All these different, you don't really notice when you're renting an Airbnb, but then you kind of have an idea. I mean, imagine if you got a text message, hey, you guys have so many people at the house or something like this. I imagine it's their location sensors or whatever it might be. But so with your teaching, with your mentoring, you talk a lot about working on your business versus working in your business. So what activities should Airbnb investors be focusing on to be working on the business rather than in the business all the time?
Yeah, great question. So the 3 main operations when running an Airbnb is cleaning, maintenance, and communication. They're going to be ongoing, and it's like the 3 essentials part of running a successful business. And there's a lot of Airbnb hosts and people that do this in other businesses, but if you're doing communication and you're also cleaning the property and you're also doing maintenance on the property, because you're working in the business, you don't really have time or see the vision and value of getting another one. Or if you do, you're kind of like, oh man, I can only clean 2 a day, so I'm pretty tapped out. And now you're running your business like a job. So in the book, E-Myth Revised by Michael E. Gerber, he talks about the 3 levels of entrepreneurship. There's a technician, the manager, and the entrepreneur. Technician, manager, entrepreneur. So the technician, all they care about is what do I do and how do I do it? They're just doing. They're that solopreneur that wears the hat, and they're all the hats in the business. They do marketing, sales, client delivery, customer service, like everything. And they're very much in the business, and they don't, because they run their business like a job, They can't, if they're thinking of going to Hawaii for a week, they're like, I'm going to stop making income because if I stop, the business stops. So they're trading their hours for dollars, no leverage. And then the next level is where you become like the manager, and now you hire out those 3 positions. You hire 3 technicians. So now you could be more implementing like business structure, more systems, and now you're communicating with each technician on the cleaning, the maintenance, and the communication. And then of course, you could start growing and focusing more on acquisitions, more on like income producing activities, focusing on like the 80-20 rule, and you focus on acquisitions, implement the system. And then the highest level is the entrepreneur, and that's the visionary. You're no longer working in the business, you're working on the business. Now you hire, maybe you hire 3 managers, and each manager oversees 5 properties. And now you got 15 Airbnbs. You communicate with your managers, then they communicate with all the technicians below, and you could focus on, again, the 20% of activities that generate 80% of the results. So as an entrepreneur and a visionary, we've hired a manager that oversees our portfolio and communicates directly with the entire team. So if you want to truly grow and scale, not just an Airbnb business, but any business, you got to start thinking like a visionary, and you got to start delegating and building a team and systems and asset protection. So this way, if you go on vacation for 7 days, you make the same amount of money as if you were back home.
Yeah, you're outsourcing a lot of those low value, lifetime value tasks off your plate, and yeah, actually running it like a business. So, how does someone go about systemizing or automating their Airbnb business? What are some of the first steps that you suggest someone to take?
Yeah, so one of those things is hiring a cleaning person. Obviously, when you interview them, you want to make sure that you delegate everything that involves any in-person stuff. Obviously, cleaning, taking out the trash, replenishable. So if, like keeping track of toilet paper, paper towels, and, once a month, go to Costco and then have like a storage, keep track of that. If the guests are requesting more blankets or a fan or a heater, to be accessible. So ideally, you want to hire a cleaning person that lives with as close as possible to the property. Hopefully no more than 15 minutes. You want to make sure that you add them as a co-host to the Airbnb. This way they have access to the calendar and you don't have to be communicating when to clean. The other thing is you can hire virtual assistants, like in the Philippines, on a website called onlinejobs.ph. And for $20 a month, you can have someone do all the communications for your property. You want to create like a Google Doc with all the FAQs, and then you want to build onto that document as more questions come up until your virtual assistant knows your property inside and out. And then for maintenance, you again want to hire like a local handyman that could be on call and available. And ideally your cleaning crew should communicate directly with them. So like one time, I think this was the first time, this was me just educating my cleaning crew. I got a call saying, hey, it looks like there's a plumbing issue. And I said, great, who's going to fix it? Like instead of coming to me with the problem, come to me with the solution. And just teaching them to be like managers and operators and come to me with 3 solutions before you call me type of thing. And they already know, and just, staying on top of it, because these things have to be handled with urgency. And if I'm away from my phone and guests checked out at 10 and new guests come at 3 and you waited, so just training them, also building that trust. And yeah, let me know if I answered that correctly.
Yeah, for sure. It's really putting a team in place. And it's great that FAQ with a VA is a fantastic, which you could use for any type of business. That's a great way of taking so much off your plate, because a lot of that stuff is just copy and paste.
Exactly.
You're getting the same questions all day long. And even if you have an FAQ page, they're not going to read it. Obviously, there's not one on Airbnb, but so it's great. You need to have someone there doing that. And then the handyman, because I've seen it before where they have someone coming in like 5 or 6 hours and they have to have the plumbing issue rectified before they come in. And it's kind of, you want your team to call you and say, hey, new person's in there now. This is what we just did in the last 4 hours. And kind of, you're just getting a bill in your email or in your mail. So, so you mentor obviously a lot of new investors. What mistakes do you commonly see new investors make?
One of the mistakes that people will make is they see asking for help and asking for support as a weakness rather than a strength. So a good example is they're setting up the Airbnb, right? Whether it's on the buying, subleasing, or co-hosting side, and they have like two people setting up the entire property and it's going to take them like 10 days because it's so much work. And so I always tell my students in the beginning, like, hey, ask each other. A lot of my students that live in the same cities will come out and support each other. It's also part of like a learning experience. And then, they support the newbies. And then once they become more experienced, they support the newbies. And it's just like a great ecosystem. And so I always say, make sure you have as many people as possible. Like when I launched like my first 4, I would have like pizza parties, and I would go on social media and say, hey, who wants to learn and just get some hands-on experience, and you're going to get some free pizza. And I'd get 6, 7, 8 people, 9 people setting up, and we'd be done in like 2 days. Wow. So I would say that's definitely a big one right there. Another one is just make sure that you don't over leverage yourself. So you don't want to be doing the communication for like 5 or 6 Airbnb. So I would say after you have 2, for the third one and moving forward, you want to really start delegating those communications, because you actually lose money if you don't. Those are like $2 to $3 activities, and you should focus on higher income producing activities. And so this is where figuring out how much your hour is worth is a great strategy. So if you take your desired income and divide it by 2,000, you're going to get your desired hourly. So $100,000 a year divided by 2,000 is $50 an hour. And if you're someone that's making, say, $60 and that's $60,000 a year, and you want to get to $100K a year, you should not do anything that is less than $50 or maybe even $30 and below. So don't mow your lawn, don't do your laundry, don't wash your car. Like all these things you could delegate for $10 to $25 an hour, and you should be focusing on those $50 an hour activities.
Yeah, it's amazing how many things that you can take off your plate with just a virtual assistant, and they don't even need like a huge time requirement. You can start them off. We started off and we just say, hey, we're starting off at $5 or 5 hours a week. Right. And then we just add more stuff on and add more stuff on after they start working with you. And, it's great in the beginning. You do have to, that's a great thing about when you're systemizing to note everything that you're doing in the process for everything you're trying to at some point take off your plate. Then you can just kind of send that over to them, and they have an idea, they have a plan for what's going on. And then also, when you properly spend the time, the hours it takes to get someone to where you want them as a VA and to take over your role fully, it takes many hours. And I think people underestimate that. They just hire them and say, okay, I'm going on vacation, which you've got to really now the work starts for the next maybe month, 2 months until it gets to where you want. But in month 3, when it comes around, you're going to be very happy that you did those steps. But so how has becoming a mentor played a role in your growth in business and personally?
I look back and mentors have changed my life. When ever since I was like 12 years old and my dad passed away from alcohol, I attracted my first mentor into my life. And I remember he sat with me. It was my 7th grade substitute teacher, Mr. Parcell. And, being a person in his 30s and me being 12 years old, obviously having a lot of life experience, he said to me that I didn't have to repeat the patterns and I didn't have to be a product of my environment, that I could set a new standard for my younger siblings, and that I could change the world. And so learning from someone else who had a great life or someone that just has the result and outcome that I desire, basically what I'm doing is paying for speed. Like, yeah, I could just go through the YouTube videos and the books and, but it might take me 5 to 10 times longer. And so throughout my life, I've always had mentors. I have multiple mentors now. And anytime I've wanted to get into a new industry or something new that I didn't have mastered, I've always asked myself one question: who is the very best at that already? And how can I work with them to help me go further, bigger, faster, and stronger? And so essentially that's what I've done, being 12 years of full-time business owner and building multiple 7-figure businesses. there's so much that I've learned over the years. And so when someone is coming in and it's their first time starting a business, being an Airbnb, there's so much that I could help them do and to really kickstart their journey. And I see it two ways, right? You either make the investment in the front end, or you pay the price in the back end. And the price is a lot more expensive because you got to reinvent the wheel, go through all the mistakes. And if you have that mindset of like, oh, I think I could do it on my own, and I'll just do it on my own, it's just going to take a long time. And that's okay for some people. I like to create bigger, faster results anytime I can. And so aside from that, I also did notice even like a multiple X more of success in my life when I went from focusing on myself and I started focusing on other people. It's like the universe just started blessing me and saying, wow. And that's what I see as, if I was to create just success for myself, it's like, I don't know, what's the point of that? And so the idea here is, how can I share the golden nuggets? How can I share that learning curve and share it with someone else so that they don't have to go through what I went through, and they can also create freedom for their family? So for me, a big part of my life is being in contribution and making a difference.
Yeah, you went from trying to make money and starting a business, and then you realize and discover a whole new purpose in your life that you didn't even know existed. And that's, helping people find, come to where you are.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, it was very clear to me in like 2017, we accomplished some massive goals that we had financially. And I remember I came home and me and my wife celebrated, we went out to eat. And then 3 days later, I just felt like empty. I was just like, I don't feel like $1 million, and that's what I realized, is that I was just focusing on myself. And that's when it just became super apparent to me that I should share what I've learned with other people. And that makes me feel like $1 million, just being in contribution and making a difference. Like seeing some of my students that they actually now are able to spend time with their kids, with their spouse, and just seeing their growth, man, that's just priceless.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. And how can people learn more about you and your business? And then any kind of links I'll put into the show notes.
Yeah, the best way would be on Instagram, the Jorge Contreras. I will be launching my personal brand website, the jorgecontreras.com, in a few weeks. But Instagram for now would be the best way. And my email, also jorge@therealsystem.com.
Okay. Awesome, Jorge. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, and looking forward to linking up with you in the future.
Thank you, man. I appreciate your time, Charles.
Talk to you soon.
Take care.
Hi guys, it's Charles from the Global Investors Podcast. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you're interested in getting involved with real estate but you don't know where to begin, set up a free 30-minute strategy call with me at schedulecharles.com. That's schedulecharles.com. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Global Investor Podcast. If you like the show, be sure to subscribe on iTunes or Google Play to get new weekly episodes. For more resources and to receive our newsletter, please visit globalinvestorpodcast.com. And don't forget to join us next week for another episode.
Nothing in this episode should be considered specific, personal, or professional advice. Any investment opportunities mentioned on this podcast are limited to accredited investors. Any investments will only be made with proper disclosure, subscription documentation, and are subject to all applicable laws. Please consult an appropriate tax, legal, real estate, financial, or business professional for individualized advice. Opinions of guests are their own. Information is not guaranteed. All investment strategies have the potential for profit or loss. The host is operating on behalf of Harborside Partners Incorporated exclusively.